You've been talking about reinventing America, and a lot of the examples that you gave is about America being at the spearhead of reinvention along history, right? But now we're talking about global problems, right, that affect everyone around the whole world, and there are a lot of smart people coming from not just America, right? What about the rest of the world? You did talk about reinventing Europe, like reinvent Europe, but I felt like you were just talking about America, right? What about the rest of the world?
Totally get the global thing. And I will say, I am American. I'm living in America. I think America is in a particularly potent juncture right now, and so that's where my living and breathing and my examples and what I know and what my life has been about. So it's kind of where I kind of come from, and that's where I talk about. But clearly, my intellectual framework and my kind of understanding of how the world works is absolutely. There's tons of other places that are doing incredible invention and reinvention and innovation. I guess if I just had to say it, though, I would say, and again, in an hour conversation, you're trying to basically move things fast. I will say that Americans, without being too chauvinistic, I would hope, one thing Americans are really good at is innovation. It's kind of something like built into the fabric of the culture or the kind of personality of the country. It's kind of just something that, the idols from the earliest days of Ben Franklin and, Edison and, Ford and, Steve Jobs, all these icons that we think about. There's this lionizing of the out-of-the-box thinker. There's this kind of, our schools celebrate the creative kind of thinker. And instead of, and I lived in Asia for a while, for example, and, the educational systems there are really essentially promote much more memorization and much more kind of lecture for, taking the information from the top down. And the American kind of system is kind of like, try your own idea and celebrate things and be the rebel. And, anyhow, the whole Hollywood celebrates that whole thing. Anyhow, there's this whole thing that permeates the culture that really is more conducive to innovation. Try to do things and try to experiment things and be the individual breaking the new mold or thinking outside the box, all that stuff. And so I would just say, if you had to think about the global context in this juncture of history, and you'd say you beam down from another planet, and you're kind of just roaming around saying, like, where would you go to try to figure out where would the innovation, most fundamental innovation probably coming from? People would tend to maybe point you to, well, you should probably check America. That's kind of the crazy wacko folks that like to rethink things all the time. And if you got into America, they'd kind of point you, well, you should probably go to California. That's kind of the wackiest end of things. And then if they got in California, they'd say, well, you should probably go up to the Bay Area. And in fact, this is, if you really have to get down to it, kind of a collection. And it's also an open, diverse place, more so than most places on the planet. So we welcome crazy other out-of-the-box thinkers from all over the world, right? But that doesn't happen in a lot of cultures. Japan and other places, they're not welcoming people from other countries, or China, for example, or different places I've been, or even European countries are more resistant to outsiders. So anyhow, there's a kind of just a mix, a stew, a culture, a kind of a zeitgeist that is not a bad place to start. That said, it's not the only place it's happening. It's happening all over. And I think what you're going to see in the next 10 or 20 years, it's going to be a global phenom. It's going to go all over. It's happening. I think this reinvention thing, I do think it's going to see more of it faster here, but I think it's going to be something that you'll see happening all over the place soon. And, I do not think, I'll just say it, I do not think that the U.S. is going to fade out and be this kind of ho-hum thing and not really be in the center of this kind of reinvention, and that it's all going to be about China or it's all going to be about someplace else. And there are people talking like that. I just think that's crazy. I just don't think it matches with the facts. I don't think it looks at the big picture history. It doesn't understand the culture. Doesn't see it. I'll give you one little example of that is, for example, I just had a conversation with two Americans who were living in China, and they were running private schools geared to Western expatriates there. And they were essentially just recently asked by the Chinese government, asked these folks to essentially leave their jobs and actually start essentially internal in China, Chinese schools around the kind of basically American, but a kind of Western model, but American model. And the reason is because they actually realize that even though the Chinese test scores are beating the pants off the Americans, and even though, you know, the kind of memorization of math and science stuff is happening, they understand they're not breeding essentially an innovative culture. They're not getting that kind of fundamental reinvention and entrepreneurial kind of new things that essentially are the things that are essentially going to drive the next generation of big companies. And I defy anybody here to, you know, I bet you couldn't name one, maybe let alone 3 Chinese companies of real innovation that are really driving global innovation, and you could, you know, and we get it, you know, they're littered around here in just the Bay Area here. So I'm just saying, what I'm saying is the Chinese recognize that. And so I think there's something, there is something that's going on there that I think is worth thinking about. Again, not trying to be chauvinistic, but just trying to be accurate and just trying to think, okay, what's the truth? Where would you go for innovation? I would say here and in other places too. Anyhow, I hope they didn't offend too many people. Maybe, I don't know, that was a long, maybe one more, yeah, because that was a long conversation. All right.